My phone buzzed just 6 hours before my sister's engagement party. It was a text from my dad. Don't come. The guest list is final. We don't want unnecessary drama. I stared at those 12 words until they blurred. For a second, I almost believed I still deserved to be treated that way. So I stayed exactly where I was inside the White House, finishing a meeting I wasn't allowed to talk about. The next morning, a national magazine published one photo. 3 hours later, my sister called in tears. Dad, just saw the magazine. What have you done to this family? My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 31 years old, and if you ask my family what I did for a living, they'd probably shrug and tell you I worked some boring government office job pushing paperwork around all day. That answer was easier for them than admitting they had never bothered to ask. I live in Washington, D.C., while my parents still live in Northern Virginia, less than 2 hours away. Close enough to visit whenever I wanted, yet somehow far enough that I always felt like a stranger the moment I walked through their front door. My younger sister, Emma, had always been the center of our parents' universe. Every achievement she earned became a family celebration. Every mistake she made became someone else's fault. Meanwhile, I learned early that the best way to survive was to expect nothing. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, it never really mattered. Somehow the spotlight always found Emma, and I became the quiet daughter standing just outside its reach. Over the years, I stopped trying to compete for attention. Instead, I built a life that made me proud. My career required complete discretion. I couldn't discuss projects, clients, or even where some meetings took place. Whenever relatives asked what I actually did, my parents answered before I had the chance. Claire just works for the government. Then they'd immediately change the subject. I never corrected them. Not because I was embarrassed. Because my work taught me that real accomplishments never need constant announcements. When Emma announced her engagement, I genuinely felt happy for her. A formal invitation arrived in my mailbox 3 weeks before the party, and I immediately mailed back my RSVP. Then, the afternoon before the celebration, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Dad. Don't come. The guest list is already full. We don't want things becoming awkward. I read those words 3 times. No explanation. No apology. Just 12 simple words telling me I no longer belonged. After a long moment, I typed only one sentence. Okay. Congratulations to Emma. I hope tomorrow is everything she dreamed of. Then I slipped my phone into my bag, walked through another security checkpoint, and returned to work inside one of the most secure buildings in America, completely unaware that one photograph taken the next morning was about to change my family's life forever. If you had asked my parents 10 years earlier where they thought my life was headed, they probably would have laughed before answering. They certainly never imagined it would lead to Washington. When I graduated from college, I told my family I wanted a career in public service. I believed that helping protect important institutions mattered more than chasing the biggest paycheck. My father leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "Government jobs are for people who aren't ambitious enough to build something real." Emma laughed. "So, you're choosing paperwork over an actual career?" The room filled with quiet chuckles. I remember forcing a smile because defending myself had never changed anyone's opinion before. Instead, I went back to my apartment and started studying. Every evening after work became another step toward the future they insisted I could never have. Competitive exams, background investigations, interviews that lasted for hours, psychological evaluations, security screenings. Months turned into years before everything finally came together. The day I received my official offer, I sat alone in my car and cried. Not because I wanted my parents to celebrate, because I finally understood I didn't need them to. As my responsibilities grew, so did the confidentiality surrounding my work. There were agreements I signed, conversations I couldn't repeat, and places I couldn't mention outside official channels. Sometimes, even Alex didn't know where I was spending the day until I returned home that evening. Whenever relatives asked about my career during holidays, my parents answered exactly the same way. Claire still works some government office job. Nobody asked another question. I simply smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. The truth didn't belong at the dinner table. It belonged to the work itself. The week of Emma's engagement happened to coincide with a White House event involving senior government officials and several invited national publications. My team spent weeks preparing every detail, making sure everything unfolded exactly as planned. When photographers moved through the room taking pictures, I barely noticed them. They were documenting history, not me. I finished the event, went home, walked Max around the neighborhood, and went to bed believing the hardest part of my weekend had been my father's text. I had no idea one published photograph was already making its way toward Virginia and toward the family that had spent decades pretending I had accomplished nothing. The morning after Emma's engagement party, I woke up early, made coffee, and settled at my kitchen table with Max curled beside my feet. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday. I checked my email, answered a few client messages for my design studio, and planned to spend the afternoon doing absolutely nothing. Then my phone started vibrating. Once, twice, 5 times in less than a minute. I glanced at the screen. Dad. I ignored it. A few seconds later, Mom called. Then Emma. Then Dad again. By the time I finished my coffee, I had 17 missed calls. Something felt wrong. My first thought was that someone had been in an accident. Then a text appeared. Claire, please answer. It's important. 5 minutes later, another one arrived. We need to talk immediately. The sudden urgency confused me. 24 hours earlier, I wasn't welcome at Emma's engagement party. Now, they couldn't seem to reach me fast enough. Before calling anyone back, I opened the news app on my phone. One headline immediately caught my attention. The White House event from yesterday had been featured by a nationally distributed magazine. Curious, I opened the digital edition. As I scrolled through the photographs, I froze. There I was, standing with several senior officials during the event briefing, my identification badge visible, my name printed beneath the photograph along with my official title. I stared at the page for several long seconds. I hadn't expected to appear in the feature at all. Apparently, neither had my family. The calls continued. 23, 24, 25. Then my aunt called. She never called unexpectedly. I finally answered. Before I could say hello, she blurted out, Claire, your father just saw the magazine. I stayed silent. She continued carefully. Your mother thought someone had edited the picture. Then Emma searched her name online. Your official biography came up, along with articles mentioning your work. Everyone from yesterday's engagement party is talking about it. I closed my eyes. Not because I felt victorious. Because I suddenly understood why the phone wouldn't stop ringing. For years, my parents had introduced me as the daughter who accomplished nothing worth mentioning. One published photograph had quietly told the truth. And now the story they had spent decades protecting was collapsing faster than any of them could stop it. Then another voicemail notification appeared. This one would change everything. I let the voicemail sit unopened for almost an hour. Part of me already knew whatever was inside wouldn't erase 20 years of silence. Eventually, I pressed play. My father's voice sounded different. Not stronger. Not wiser. Just frightened. Claire, he began, there's been a misunderstanding. Your mother, and I never meant for things to look this way. People are asking questions, and they're getting the wrong idea. Please call us. A misunderstanding. I almost laughed. There had never been a misunderstanding. There had only been choices. As I sat there staring out the kitchen window, memories started returning one after another. When I made the honor roll in high school, Dad barely looked up from the television before saying, "That's nice." 2 weeks later, Emma finished third in a local dance competition. My parents rented a banquet room to celebrate. When I earned a scholarship to college, Mom told relatives it wasn't a big achievement because plenty of students received financial aid. When Emma bought her first car with their help, they proudly posted pictures all over social media, calling her the family's rising star. Every milestone followed the same pattern. Emma's successes were announced. Mine were quietly ignored. Even after I moved to Washington, nothing changed. Whenever relatives visited, my parents told them I had some ordinary government desk job. Sometimes they joked that I probably spent my days filing papers in a basement somewhere. Everyone laughed. I usually did too. Correcting them never felt worth the effort. The people who truly cared about me already knew who I was. The people who didn't probably never would. That realization gave me something my childhood never had. Peace. I stopped chasing approval that was never being offered. Instead, I poured my energy into meaningful work, loyal friendships, and a life built on honesty instead of appearances. The magazine article hadn't exposed a secret. It had simply introduced the real Claire Morgan to people who had never wanted to know her. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't my father. It was my cousin Rachel. Her message was short. Grandma's asking everyone to come over tonight. She says the whole family deserves to hear the truth together. Will you come? I read it twice. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of walking back into that house. Because this time, I wasn't looking for their approval. I already knew my worth. I drove to my grandmother's house just before sunset. The same brick home where every Christmas dinner, birthday celebration, and family barbecue had taken place since I was a little girl. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed nearly every car was already there. Apparently, Grandma hadn't invited just my parents. She had invited everyone. For one brief moment, I considered turning around. Then I remembered the text. Don't come. The guest list is final. I smiled to myself. This time, I had chosen to come. Not because anyone finally wanted me there. Because I no longer needed permission. The conversations inside stopped the moment I walked through the front door. Every pair of eyes landed on me. My grandmother crossed the room first and wrapped me in the kind of hug I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. I'm glad you came, she whispered. So am I. Dad stood near the fireplace. He looked exhausted. Mom avoided my eyes. Emma sat quietly on the couch, twisting her engagement ring over and over. Dad cleared his throat. Claire, before anyone gets the wrong impression, we just want to explain what happened. I raised my hand politely. No. The room fell silent. I've listened to explanations my entire life. Tonight, I only have one question. I looked directly at my father. If that magazine had never been published, would you have invited me back? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Mom looked toward the floor. Emma stared at her hands. Nobody answered. After several long seconds, my Aunt Linda spoke softly. Your parents told everyone you couldn't make the engagement party because you were too busy. I slowly reached into my purse. I know. I unlocked my phone. Then I placed it on the coffee table. The screen showed Dad's message. Don't come. The guest list is final. Nobody spoke. The silence became heavier than any argument ever could. Grandma picked up the phone and read the message herself. When she looked at my parents again, disappointment filled her face. Not anger, not shock, just heartbreaking disappointment. Dad finally whispered, Claire, we're sorry. I met his eyes calmly. I didn't come here for an apology. I came because, for the first time in my life, everyone deserves to know why I stopped trying to be part of this family. No one spoke after my last sentence. The room felt impossibly still. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought if my family ever learned the truth about my life, I would finally feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. I looked around the room at the people I had spent most of my childhood trying to impress. I didn't come here because my picture ended up in a magazine, I said quietly. And I didn't come here because I wanted anyone to admire my career. I paused before continuing. I came because I wanted to stop pretending that what happened between us was ever normal. My father's shoulders slumped. I thought pushing you would make you stronger. I shook my head. No. The people who made me stronger weren't the ones who kept putting me down. I smiled gently as I thought about the people who had changed my life. It was the teachers who stayed after class to encourage me, the mentors who challenged me because they believed in me, the colleagues who respected my work without asking where I came from, the friends who celebrated my successes without comparing me to anyone else. I looked at my mother, and the family I built for myself. Tears rolled down her face. I was wrong, she whispered. I know, I answered softly. Emma finally spoke. I spent years believing everything Mom and Dad said about you. I thought you looked down on us because you never talked about your job. I wasn't hiding from you, I replied. I was protecting work I had promised to protect. There's a difference. She nodded through her tears. I'm sorry. For the first time that evening, I believed the apology was genuine. I forgive all of you, I said. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. I picked up my purse and walked toward the front door. I truly hope your lives become happier from here. Then I smiled. But that journey has to happen without me carrying the weight of your choices anymore. And with that, I quietly walked away. The drive back to Washington felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just finished. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head or wondering whether I could have done something differently. There was nothing left to prove. When I pulled into my driveway, Max came running to the front door before I even had my key out. Alex smiled as he opened it. How are you feeling? I looked past him into the home we had built together. The quiet evenings, the laughter, the trust, the life no one had handed me, but that I had earned piece by piece. I think, I said with a small smile, I'm finally home. A week later, Dad sent one final text. It simply read, We're sorry. We understand if you never come back. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed the only response that felt honest. I truly hope you find peace. But my life is here now. Please respect my decision. I wished them well. Then I blocked the number. Not because I hated them. Because healing sometimes requires closing a door that should never be opened again. A few days later, I walked into my office and noticed that same White House magazine sitting on a shelf. I smiled. Not because my photograph was inside it, but because it reminded me of something far more important. The magazine didn't make me successful. It simply introduced the world to the woman I had become despite everything. The greatest achievement of my life was never appearing in its pages. It was learning that real family never needs proof to be proud of you.